I never imagined that the proudest moment of my life would also become the most terrifying. There I was, Evelyn Carter, 71 years old, sitting in the kind of restaurant I used to only dream about when I was washing dishes in a diner 50 years ago. The kind of place where the silverware is heavier than most people's rent checks, and the waiters move like ghosts in expensive suits. Crystal chandeliers threw soft golden light across white linen. And somewhere in the corner, a pianist played something beautiful and forgettable. This was supposed to be my night. After 5 decades of building a business from absolutely nothing, after every loan rejection and every man who told me I'd never make it, I had finally sold my company. The payout was more money than I ever dared to imagine. Enough to secure not just my future, but my son's future and his children's futures too. Legacy money, the kind that changes bloodlines. And sitting across from me, smiling like he'd won the lottery himself, was Ryan, my only son, my entire world. He'd been perfect all evening, ordered my favorite wine before I even sat down, laughed at my old stories about the early days, the ones he'd heard 100 times. His wife Tessa held my hand and told me how inspiring I was, how she wished her own mother had half my strength. Ryan raised his glass and made a toast that brought tears to my eyes. He talked about sacrifice and persistence and how I taught him what real strength looked like. He said he was proud to be my son. And God help me, I believed every word. I felt like everything I'd worked for had finally come full circle. All the years I'd missed tucking him in because I was balancing books at midnight. All the school events I'd skipped because I was pitching clients or fighting off bankruptcy. All of it suddenly felt worth it because he was here, grown and handsome and successful, telling me I'd done something right. When he stood up and excused himself, saying he needed to take a quick call outside, I watched him walk away with so much love in my chest I thought it might burst. That's my boy, I thought. That's the man I raised. Then everything shattered. I was reaching for my glass, a beautiful ruby-colored cocktail Ryan had specially ordered for me, when I felt someone beside me, not hovering the way servers do, waiting politely to refill water. This was different, closer, more urgent. I looked up and saw him, a security guard with gray hair and tired eyes, the kind of face that seen things most people only read about in newspapers. He wasn't looking at me the way staff usually do with that practiced, pleasant distance. He was looking at me the way you'd look at someone standing on train tracks who doesn't hear the whistle coming. He leaned down, close enough that I could see the deep lines around his mouth, and he spoke in a low, careful voice that cut through the soft restaurant noise like a knife. He said quietly, urgently, "You really shouldn't drink that." My hand froze halfway to the glass. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd misheard him, that maybe he was confused or talking to someone else. But his eyes were locked on mine with an intensity that made my stomach drop like an elevator with cut cables. "I saw your son," he continued, each word deliberate and heavy. "When you turned to speak with your daughter-in-law, he took something from his pocket, a small vial, and he poured it into your drink. The air left my lungs. Everything around me, the music, the laughter from nearby tables, the gentle clink of glasses and silverware, it all became muffled and distant, like I was underwater. I stayed at my drink. It looked exactly as it had 30 seconds ago. Deep red, beautiful, with a twist of orange peel on the rim. Completely innocent. Except now it wasn't. Now it was something else entirely. My hand started to shake, and I set the glass down carefully, afraid that if I didn't, I'd drop it and shatter the entire illusion holding this moment together. I looked at the guard, searching his face for any sign of confusion or mistake. But there was none. Just steady, sorrowful certainty. This man, this complete stranger whose name I didn't even know, had just told me that my own son, the boy I'd cared and raised and sacrificed everything for, had tried to poison me. And what broke me wasn't just the horror of it. It was that I believed him. Instantly. Completely. Because somewhere deep in my gut, in that place mothers never want to look, I'd already known something was wrong. Earlier that evening, when I'd first walked into the restaurant, I felt like I was floating. The valet took my car, a sleek black sedan I'd bought myself just last week as a tiny celebration, and I stepped into the lobby feeling lighter than I had in years. This place was the kind of establishment where senators and CEOs came to be seen, where every detail whispered old money and quiet power. The hostess knew my name before I said it. Ryan had made the reservation weeks ago, insisting on somewhere special, somewhere worthy of what I'd accomplished. And God, I'd been so touched by that, so grateful that my son wanted to honor me this way. When I sat down at the table, Ryan and Tessa were already there, dressed beautifully, smiling like proud children at a parent's graduation. Tessa hugged me tight and told me I looked radiant. Ryan stood and pulled out my chair himself, kissing my cheek and whispering, "Tonight's all about you, Mom. Everything you've earned." I remember thinking in that moment that maybe, just maybe, all those years of doubt and worry had been for nothing. That maybe I'd raised a good man after all. But as the evening unfolded, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Ryan and Tessa were saying all the right things, hitting all the right notes, but it felt like watching a performance. Like they'd rehearsed this. Tessa kept touching my hand and saying how proud she was to be part of this family, how much she admired everything I'd built. Ryan talked about legacy and sacrifice and how he'd always looked up to me. But their eyes didn't quite match their words. There was something underneath, something hungry and impatient that made my skin prickle. When Ryan said, "Now you can finally rest, Mom. Let us take care of everything," it should have felt comforting. But instead, it felt like a door closing. Like he was already planning my exit from my own life. Tessa jumped in immediately, talking about how I deserved to travel, to relax, to stop worrying about business and money and all those stressful things. "You've done enough," she said sweetly, squeezing my hand. "It's time to let go and enjoy what you've built." Except the way she said it didn't sound like love. It sounded like a suggestion, a script, a gentle push toward irrelevance. I tried to ignore the unease creeping up my spine, tried to focus on the good parts, the laughter, the expensive wine, the way Ryan kept refilling my glass and making toasts. But my mind kept drifting back to old memories, the kind I'd buried under years of hope and denial. Ryan as a teenager, borrowing $200 for textbooks and spending it on concert tickets, then acting shocked when I was upset. Ryan in his 20s, calling me in tears about rent he couldn't pay, promising it was the last time, and then calling again 3 months later. Ryan at 35, asking for a loan to start a business that never quite materialized, but somehow he always had money for vacations and designer clothes. Small things. Forgivable things. The kind of things mothers excuse because we want so desperately to believe our children will grow out of it. My late husband, God rest him, had seen it more clearly than I did. Before he passed, he'd pulled me aside one night after Ryan had blown through another chunk of money we'd given him, and he'd said something I'd never forgotten. "Evelyn, love isn't always enough. Sometimes you have to let people fail, or they'll never learn to stand." But I hadn't listened. I'd kept giving, kept bailing him out, kept telling myself that this time would be different. And now here we were. Tessa was already talking about houses, casually mentioning a property in Napa she'd seen that would be perfect for weekend getaways. Ryan was nodding along, saying maybe it was time to upgrade their lifestyle, now that things were more secure. More secure, as if the money was already theirs, as if I was already gone. I felt a chill run through me, but I pushed it down. This was supposed to be a celebration. I was supposed to be happy. So I lifted my glass when Ryan proposed another toast, and I smiled when Tessa clinked hers against mine with that perfect, practiced grin. I brought the glass to my lips, ready to take a sip and push away all those old doubts one more time. And that's when Ryan stood up, smoothly, effortlessly, and said he needed to step outside for a quick call. He kissed Tessa on the cheek, squeezed my shoulder with what felt like genuine affection, and walked away. And 30 seconds later, a gray-haired security guard leaned down beside me and whispered the words that would destroy everything I thought I knew. "You really shouldn't drink that." The moment the guard stepped back into the shadows, I made a decision. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to confront Ryan in front of a room full of strangers. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I was going to do what I'd done my entire life when faced with something impossible. I was going to stay calm, gather evidence, and plan my next move carefully. My hands were shaking under the table, but my face remained perfectly composed. Years of negotiating with men who wanted to intimidate me had taught me how to hide fear behind a mask of control. I nodded slightly at the guard, a silent thank you that I hoped conveyed the gratitude I couldn't speak aloud. He gave me the smallest nod back and melted into the background, continuing his rounds as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just saved my life. When Ryan returned to the table a few minutes later, sliding back into his chair with that easy smile, I was ready. Tessa was showing me something on her phone, some villa in Tuscany she thought I'd love. Ryan reached for his water and asked if I'd finally tried the cocktail he'd ordered for me. The glass sat there, untouched, glowing red under the chandelier light like a warning. I pressed my hand against my stomach and let my face twist slightly, just enough to look uncomfortable. "You know what?" I said, my voice a little strained. "I'm not feeling very well all of a sudden. I think maybe the richness of the food is catching up with me." Concern flooded their faces instantly. Too instantly. Too perfectly rehearsed. "Oh no. Mom, what's wrong?" Ryan leaned forward, his hand reaching across the table toward mine. "Do you need water? Should we call someone?" Tessa was already half standing, her voice dripping with worry. "Evelyn, you look pale. Maybe we should take you to the hospital." I waved them off gently, playing the role of the stubborn older woman who doesn't want to make a fuss. No, it's nothing serious. I just need to lie down. I think I'll head home." Ryan stood immediately. "We'll drive you. Come on, let me get the car." But I shook my head firmly, reaching for my purse. "Absolutely not. You two stay and enjoy the rest of the evening. I've already ordered a ride-share. It'll be here in just a minute." They protested, of course. Ryan insisted. Tessa put her hand on my arm and said she wouldn't feel right letting me go alone. But I was firm, the way only a mother can be when she's made up her mind. And they backed down, reluctantly, because what else could they do without making a scene? As I stood to leave, I made my move. My hand, still trembling slightly from adrenaline, reached for my purse on the table. I let it swing just a little too wide, just a little too carelessly, and knocked directly into my glass. The red cocktail spilled across the white tablecloth in a dramatic, spreading stain, the liquid soaking into the fabric like blood. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," I said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Servers appeared instantly, rushing over with fresh napkins and apologies. Ryan and Tessa jumped back to avoid the spill, momentarily distracted by the chaos. And in that brief window of confusion, while everyone was focused on the mess, I grabbed one of the thick cloth napkins and pressed it directly into the deepest part of the spill, soaking up as much liquid as I could. Then I folded it quickly, casually, and slipped it into my purse as if I were just cleaning up. No one noticed. They were too busy dabbing at the table and calling for a busboy. I apologized again, kissed them both goodbye, and walked out of that restaurant with my head high and my heart pounding like a war drum. But I didn't go home. Instead, I gave the driver an address across town, a private diagnostic lab I'd used years ago for company health screenings. The kind of place that stays open late and asks very few questions if you pay in cash. When I walked in, the night receptionist looked up with mild surprise. I must have been quite a sight, a 71-year-old woman in evening wear, clutching her purse like it contained state secrets. I told her I needed an emergency toxicology test. She started to explain their normal procedures, the wait times, the paperwork, but I cut her off. I pulled out my credit card and said I'd pay double for immediate processing. Money talks, even at midnight. She took the napkin, now sealed in a plastic bag I'd asked for, and told me the results would be ready in a few hours. I thanked her and left, walking down the street until I found a small 24-hour diner, the kind with cracked vinyl booze and coffee that tastes like it's been sitting since morning. I ordered a cup I had no intention of drinking and sat by the window, watching cars pass and trying not to think about what I'd just done. But of course, that's all I could think about. If the test came back positive, if there really was poison in that drink, then everything changed. My son had tried to kill me, not in a moment of rage or passion, but carefully, deliberately, in a public place where my death would look natural. An old woman, celebrating too hard, her heart giving out from the excitement. No one would question it. No one would investigate. And Ryan would inherit everything, just as I'd planned in my will, except years earlier than expected. The thought made me feel sick in a way that had nothing to do with my stomach. But even worse than the betrayal was the dilemma it created. If I went to the police, this would become public. My name, Ryan's name, the company I'd built, my late husband's memory, all of it would be dragged through the ugliest kind of spectacle. The media would feast on it. Business partners would distance themselves. Everything I'd worked for would be reduced to a true crime headline. I sat in that diner booth, staring at the fluorescent lights and wondering how I'd gotten here, until my phone buzzed with a message from the lab. The results were ready. My hand shook as I walked back and took the envelope from the receptionist. I didn't open it until I was outside, standing under a street lamp like some noir detective. The words on the page were clinical and cold. The napkin tested positive for a massive dose of a cardiac medication I'd never been prescribed, in a concentration far beyond any therapeutic level. According to the report, in someone my age with my medical history, it would almost certainly trigger a fatal heart attack within hours. Ryan hadn't just tried to kill me. He tried to make it look like nature. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my living room with a lab report on the coffee table in front of me, staring at it like it might change if I looked long enough. By the time the sun started to rise, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to the police. Not yet. Not until I understood the full picture. And there was only one person I trusted enough to help me see it clearly. I picked up my phone and called Lena Morales. She answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the early hour. "Evelyn, what's wrong?" Lena had always been able to read me, even over the phone. She was the daughter of my late business partner, Marcus, who died 10 years ago from cancer. I'd watched her grow up, helped pay for her law school, celebrated when she passed the bar. In many ways, she was more of a daughter to me than Ryan had ever been a son. When I told her I needed to see her immediately, that it was urgent and private, she didn't ask questions. She just gave me an address. 2 hours later, I was sitting in her glass-walled office high above the city, watching the morning traffic crawl below us like ants, while I told her everything. I showed her the lab report first, watched her face go from confusion to shock to something colder and harder than I'd ever seen. Then I walked her through the entire evening, every detail I could remember. The dinner, the toasts, Ryan's sudden departure, the guard's warning, the spilled drink, the midnight lab visit. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment, her fingers steepled under her chin. Finally, she spoke, and her voice had the kind of controlled fury that comes from someone who's seen too much betrayal in her line of work. "Evelyn, you understand what this means. Your son attempted to murder you. This isn't a family dispute. This is a felony. Multiple felonies, actually." I nodded slowly. "I know, but if we go to the police right now, this becomes a circus. The media, the company, everything I've built gets dragged through the mud. I need to know why first. I need to understand what drove him to this before I decide how to handle it." Lena studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, then we do this quietly. We gather everything, and we build a case so airtight that when you're ready to move, he won't have anywhere to run." She made a few calls while I sat there, drinking coffee I couldn't taste. Within an hour, she'd assembled a small team. Not cops, not official investigators. These were private professionals, the kind companies hire when they need to know the truth without public records. Ex-fraud specialists, forensic accountants, background researchers who knew how to dig through digital footprints like archaeologists through ancient ruins. Lena briefed them with the clinical precision of a surgeon, and they went to work. Over the next few days, I lived in a strange kind of limbo. I went through the motions of normal life, answering Ryan's concerned text messages about my health, deflecting Tessa's phone calls about rescheduling our celebration dinner, all while Lena's team tore through my son's life like a hurricane through a house of cards. The reports started coming back in pieces, each one worse than the last. Ryan and Tessa were drowning, not just struggling financially, but genuinely, catastrophically underwater. Maxed out credit cards across 7 different banks. A mortgage 3 months behind. Car payments in default. Personal loans from the kind of lenders who don't exactly send polite reminder notices. They'd been living far beyond their means for years, maintaining an Instagram-perfect lifestyle on a foundation of debt that was about to collapse. But it got darker. One of the investigators found something that made my blood run cold. Applications submitted in my name to financial institutions I'd never contacted. Attempts to access accounts I hadn't authorized. And then, buried in Ryan's email, a scanned document that looked exactly like my signature on a power of attorney form I'd never signed. They'd been trying to get control of my money before I even sold the company. The sale, the massive payout that had just accelerated their timeline. Suddenly, waiting for me to die naturally wasn't fast enough. They needed me gone now, before the creditors came calling, before the house of lies they'd built came crashing down around them. Lena laid it all out on her conference table like evidence at a trial. Bank statements, credit reports, email chains, loan documents, forged signatures. The portrait of two people so desperate, so entitled, so convinced that my money was their salvation that they decided murder was an acceptable solution. I stood there looking at the paper trail of my son's betrayal, and something inside me shifted. The grief was still there, sharp and terrible. But alongside it now was something harder, something colder, a resolve that felt like steel forming in my spine. Ryan had made his choice. Now I was going to make mine. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Sometimes the best strategies are the ones that use your opponent's weakness against them. And Ryan's weakness had always been assuming things would work out in his favor without him having to earn them. 2 days after Lena laid out the evidence, I picked up my phone and called my son. I made sure my voice sounded tired, a little fragile, the way someone might sound after a health scare. Ryan answered on the first ring, and I could hear the edge of anxiety underneath his cheerful greeting. He was wondering if I suspected anything, if the failed attempt had somehow left traces. I didn't let him wonder long. "Sweetheart," I said, adding just a touch of shakiness that wasn't entirely acting. "That episode at the restaurant really scared me. I've been thinking a lot about mortality, about what happens when I'm gone." I paused. Let that sink in. I've asked Lena to start drafting papers for a substantial family trust. Something that will take care of you and Tessa properly. Make sure you're both secure no matter what happens to me. I want everything in order. The silence on the other end lasted maybe 2 seconds, but I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. When he spoke again, his entire tone had shifted into something warmer, softer, more attentive than I'd heard in years. "Mom, that's really thoughtful of you. But you're going to be around for a long time. You don't need to worry about this stuff right now." But even as he said it, I could hear the hunger underneath. The need. I know, I replied gently. But it gives me peace of mind. Lena says it'll take a week or 2 to get everything properly structured. Legal things, tax considerations, making sure it's all ironclad. I let my voice drop to something more vulnerable. "I just want to know that after everything I've worked for, you'll be taken care of. That's all a mother really wants." Ryan's response was pitch perfect. Loving, grateful, exactly what a good son should say. He told me how much he appreciated me, how lucky he was to have a mother who thought about these things, how he and Tessa would support me through this process in any way they could. We talked for 20 more minutes, and by the end, you'd think we were the closest family in the world. When I hung up, Lena was sitting across from me, watching with the cold assessment of someone who'd seen this performance before in different contexts. "He took the bait," she said simply. I nodded. Hook, line, and sinker. Over the next 10 days, Ryan became the perfect son. He called every single day, sometimes twice. Asked about my health, my sleep, whether I was feeling better. Suggested we have lunch together, just the two of us, like old times. Wanted to know if Lena needed any information from him for the trust documents, if there was anything he could do to help the process move faster. His concern would have been touching if I didn't know what was really driving it. Tessa sent flowers to my house with a card that read, "Thinking of you always." They were performing love with the desperation of people who could see their salvation just within reach and couldn't afford for anything to go wrong. Meanwhile, Lena's investigators were finishing their work. They'd found the final, damning piece of the puzzle buried in Ryan's digital footprint. Forged documents attempting to establish medical power of attorney. Evidence that he'd accessed my medical records through a friend who worked in healthcare administration, a clear HIPAA violation. And search histories on his laptop that would make your skin crawl. How to cause a heart attack that looks natural. Drugs that mimic cardiac arrest. Average life expectancy after major heart event. He'd researched this, planned it, treated my murder like a project with a deadline and a desired outcome. Lena compiled everything into a presentation that looked like something you'd see in a federal courtroom. Bank records, forged documents, toxicology reports, witness statements from the restaurant guard who'd been quietly interviewed and was willing to testify. Email chains where Ryan and Tessa discussed their financial desperation in Bailey-coded language. It was airtight, devastating, the kind of evidence that doesn't just prove guilt but makes it impossible to deny. When everything was ready, Lena made the call. She told Ryan and Tessa that the trust documents were complete and ready for signing. She scheduled a formal meeting in her firm's largest conference room, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows and a table that could seat 20 people. She made it sound official, important, exactly the kind of event that would mark the transfer of generational wealth. Ryan confirmed immediately, his voice practically vibrating with barely contained excitement. They arrived 15 minutes early on the day of the meeting, dressed like they were attending a wedding or a coronation. Ryan wore a suit I'd never seen before, probably bought on credit he couldn't afford. Tessa had on a designer dress and heels that clicked against the marble lobby floor like a countdown. They smiled at the receptionist, made small talk in the elevator, walked into that conference room with the confidence of people who believed their problems were about to be solved forever. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush, and I was about to teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. The conference room was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic 40 floors below. Lena and I sat on one side of the long polished table, a stack of manila folders arranged neatly in front of us like cards about to be played. Ryan and Tessa sat across from us, and I watched them carefully. Ryan kept adjusting his tie, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. Tessa's eyes kept drifting to the folders, trying to read the labels, trying to guess which one contained the trust documents that would save them. They had no idea they were sitting at their own trial. Lena opened the meeting with the kind of calm, professional tone she'd use for any client presentation. Thank you both for coming. Before we begin, I want to make sure we're all clear about why we're here today. She looked at Ryan directly, and something in her gaze made him shift uncomfortably. We're here to discuss your future and Evelyn's estate, but not in the way you expected. She opened the first folder with deliberate slowness and slid a document across the polished wood. It stopped directly in front of Ryan. This is a toxicology report from an independent laboratory, dated 2 weeks ago. It analyzes a sample taken from a cocktail served to Evelyn at dinner. The dinner you organized. Ryan's eyes scanned the page, and I watched the color drain from his face like water from a broken glass. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Tessa leaned over to look, and her hand flew to her mouth. The substance identified, Lena continued, her voice never wavering, is a cardiac medication in a dosage approximately 8 times the therapeutic maximum. According to 3 independent medical consultants we retained, this concentration would almost certainly cause fatal cardiac arrest in someone of Evelyn's age and health profile within 2 to 4 hours of ingestion. Death would appear entirely natural. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ryan tried to speak, his voice coming out as a hoarse whisper. I don't understand what this is. This is some kind of mistake. Lena didn't even blink. She opened the second folder. This is your complete financial profile. Credit card debt totaling $347,000. Mortgage payments 3 months in arrears. Personal loans from 2 separate private lenders with interest rates that would make loan sharks blush. Combined monthly minimum payments that exceed your household income by roughly 60%. She slid that folder across too. You're not struggling, Ryan. You're drowning. And you have been for at least 2 years. Tessa started to cry. Quiet tears that streaked her makeup, but Lena wasn't finished. She opened the third folder, and this one she held up so they could both see clearly. Forged power of attorney documents bearing Evelyn's signature. Unauthorized access to her medical records obtained through fraudulent means, which is a federal HIPAA violation. And perhaps most damning, your personal computer's search history. She began reading from the page, her voice clinical and detached. How to cause a heart attack that looks natural. Drugs that mimic cardiac arrest. Inheritance law, California. Average life expectancy after cardiac event. All search from your IP address. Ryan, over a period of 6 weeks leading up to that dinner. She set the folder down and folded her hands. You didn't just try to kill your mother. You researched it, planned it, executed it. The only reason Evelyn is alive right now is because a restaurant security guard happened to see you pour something into her drink and had the moral courage to intervene. Ryan's face had gone from pale to gray. His hands were shaking on the table. Mom, please, you have to let me explain. This isn't what it looks like. I would never. I spoke for the first time since they'd entered the room, and my voice came out colder than I'd ever heard it. Stop. Ryan's mouth snapped shut. There is no family trust for you. There never was. This meeting was designed to get you here, in front of witnesses, so you could understand exactly what you've done and what happens next. Lena took over again, her lawyer's precision cutting through any possibility of misunderstanding. You have two options, and I need you to listen very carefully because you will make this choice only once. Option 1. All of this evidence, every document, every report, every witness statement, goes directly to the district attorney's office within the hour. You will be charged with attempted murder, fraud, identity theft, and multiple federal violations. Given the premeditation and the paper trail, you're looking at 15 to 25 years in state prison. Tessa, depending on what you knew and when, you may face charges as an accessory. Tessa let out a small, broken sound. Lena continued without sympathy. Option 2. You sign a binding legal agreement, drafted and notarized, that irrevocably surrenders any and all rights to Evelyn's estate, now and in perpetuity. You return any property or assets tied to her financial support, and you agree to zero contact with Evelyn for the rest of her natural life. In exchange, this evidence remains sealed in my firm's vault unless you violate the agreement in any way. Ryan's hands were trembling so badly he could barely hold the pen Lena slid across the table. Tessa was crying openly now, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. Oh, you're really going to do this? Ryan's voice cracked. You're my mother. I looked at him, this man I'd carried and raised and loved more than my own life, and felt nothing but a vast, aching emptiness where that love used to be. You tried to murder me for money. You researched how to make it look natural. You sat across from me at dinner and smiled while I drank poison. You stopped being my son the moment you decided I was worth more dead than alive. My voice didn't waver. Sign the papers. I'll spend the next 2 decades in prison. Those are your only choices, and you have 60 seconds to decide. Ryan looked at Tessa. She looked back at him, her face a mask of devastation and terror. Then, with shaking hands, he picked up the pen and signed his name on every page Lena indicated. Tessa signed next, her tears falling onto the paper and smudging the ink. When it was done, Lena collected the documents, sealed them in an envelope, and stood. You're free to go. A courier will deliver instructions about property return within 48 hours. Do not contact Evelyn. Do not attempt to contest this agreement. If you do, everything goes public and to prosecutors immediately. They stood on unsteady legs and walked toward the door like people leaving a funeral. Ryan paused at the threshold and looked back at me one last time, his eyes pleading for something I could no longer give. I looked away, and the door closed behind them with a soft, final click. 6 months later, I stood in front of a small brick building in a neighborhood I used to work in 50 years ago, back when I was washing dishes and dreaming of something bigger. The sign above the door read, "The Carter Foundation, building futures, one dream at a time." Inside, 23 people sat in a brand new classroom, most of them single mothers, immigrants, people who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't get ahead. They were here for a free 12-week business training program, complete with startup grants, mentorship, and legal support. The same money Ryan had tried to steal from me by poisoning my drink was now funding their futures. I watched through the window as a young woman, maybe 30, raised her hand and asked a question about securing a small business loan. The instructor answered patiently, thoroughly, the way someone does when they genuinely want you to succeed. I thought about Ryan in that moment, wondered where he was, what he was doing. I'd heard through distant channels that he and Tessa had moved out of state, quietly, their perfect Instagram life deleted without explanation. Part of me still ached for the little boy he used to be, the one who'd hold my hand crossing the street and tell me I was the best mom in the world. But I didn't regret my choice. Not for a second. The foundation wasn't my only legacy project. I'd also quietly established scholarship funds at 3 community colleges, specifically for older students returning to education after raising families or surviving hardship. I funded a legal aid clinic that helped people fight predatory lenders, the same kind that had been circling Ryan and Tessa like sharks. And I'd made sure that a Satan gray-haired restaurant security guard never had to worry about money again. His mortgage was paid off within a month of that night, though he never knew it was me. His granditis college tuition appeared in an account with an anonymous donor listed. He'd saved my life with a whisper, and I made sure his loyalty meant something tangible, something that would echo forward into his family's future. When I finally met him for coffee months later and told him what I'd done, he cried. Not from gratitude, though there was that, but from relief that he'd made the right choice that night, that speaking up had mattered. I've worked security for 30 years, he told me, stirring sugar into his coffee with a shaking hand. And I've seen things I didn't speak up about because it wasn't my business, or I was scared, or I just didn't want the trouble. But that night, watching your son, I couldn't stay quiet. I'm just glad you're okay. I held his hand across the table and told him he'd given me more than safety. He'd given me clarity. He'd shown me that character isn't about blood or obligation. It's about choices. And sometimes the people who care about us most are the ones who have no reason to accept that it's the right thing to do. I'd spent decades believing that being a good mother meant providing, sacrificing, giving my son every advantage I never had. But I'd confused provision with love and comfort with character. I'd handed Ryan a life so easy he never learned to value it. And in doing so, I'd failed him in a way that almost cost me everything. The foundation, the scholarships, the grants, this was my real inheritance. Not money passed to someone who saw me as an obstacle to wealth, but opportunity given to people who would use it to build something meaningful. These young people in the classroom didn't know my story. They didn't know about the poison or the betrayal or the signed documents in Lena's vault. They just knew that someone believed in them enough to invest in their potential. And that belief, that investment, would ripple forward in ways I'd never see but could trust were real. I think about legacy differently now. It's not about what you leave behind when you die. It's about what you build while you're alive. It's about the doors you open, the hands you lift, the chances you give to people who remind you of who you once were. Real legacy isn't a trust fund handed to someone who never earned it. Real legacy is the difference you make in lives that desperately need someone to see their worth. As I walked away from the foundation that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Lena. She'd heard from Ryan's lawyer. He wanted to know if there was any possibility of reconciliation, of reconsidering the agreement. I read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. Some doors, once closed, stay closed. And I'd made my peace with that. If you made it this far, I want to ask you something. What does legacy mean to you? Is it about passing wealth to the next generation, no matter what? Or is it about making sure your life mattered beyond your bank account? Drop a comment and tell me your story. I read every single one, and I promise, your perspective matters. And if this story meant something to you, if it made you think about family or trust or what we owe the people we raise, hit that like button and subscribe. Because the truth is, the best inheritance we can leave isn't money. It's wisdom. And sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that cost us the most to learn.